Somewhere in your 50s, something shifts. You stop being taken in by things the way you used to. Someone makes a claim about a supplement or a training method or a piece of equipment, and you just know. Within a few seconds, you've lived enough to read it. And then you go about your ride and you're posting the trot the way you always have, and your knee has a different idea about that. The gap between knowing and doing is real, but that's not really what this episode is about, because underneath that gap is something bigger, a reckoning with who you used to be. The version of you that believed certain things, wrote a certain way, needed certain people's approval before you trusted yourself, and the version of you now who doesn't need that anymore. This time of life asks you to let go of her, not with grief, but with something closer to permission. That's what we're talking about today. I'm Karen, and this is the Midlife Rider Project Podcast for riders who believe age doesn't define what's possible. Thank you for being here. Here's how it unfolds. I want to start with something I've noticed this past while. This decade of my 50s has been one of real transformation for me, the kind that rearranges your life and the way you think. It hasn't been a gentle decade. As a friend of mine would say, the miles have been hard. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I noticed something has changed in how my mind works. And this just isn't about horses, it's about everything. I don't think this experience is uniquely my own. I think it happens to a lot of us around this age. Women especially, though I don't think it's limited to women. There's a kind of recalibration that happens, almost as if something that's been blurry has finally come into focus. And along with that focus, there's something a bit uncomfortable too, a kind of looking back at who we used to be compared to the newest version of ourselves and thinking, why wasn't I like this sooner? Why did I buy into those things? Why did I let that person talk to me that way? Or why did I stay in that situation so much longer than I needed to? I sigh heavily and almost feel something close to embarrassment for younger versions of myself, the naivete, the things I fell for, the way I used to operate. But here's the truth. There's not anything here to be embarrassed about. That version of you, of me, wasn't foolish. She just hadn't lived this yet. This is what growth looks like. You don't get to be 50-something with this kind of clarity by skipping the parts that got you here. The naive version of you is part of the story, part of your unique journey. There's a saying that's been going around on social media, something about gray-haired women eventually taking over the world. And whenever I hear it, I think, yeah, that actually tracks. Because here's what I've noticed about myself and about how so many women I know in this stage of life, our tolerance for nonsense has gone way down, and our ability to see things as they actually are has gone way up. If someone makes a claim about a supplement or a training method or a piece of equipment, we have almost an instant read on it now, because somewhere in the back of our minds is 40 or possibly more years of having tried things, watching things fail, watching things work. We've paid attention to patterns that a lot of people don't notice. We can sit through a clinic and know within the first 20 minutes whether the trainer actually knows horses or just knows how to sound like they do. We can read a product description and feel the difference between something that's genuinely useful and something that's dressed up to sound that way. We can watch someone interact with a horse for 30 seconds and have a pretty accurate sense of what's going on. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. It's having lived long enough and paid close enough attention that things don't fool us the way they used to. And I've said this before in earlier episodes, but it's worth repeating here. There's a cultural habit of treating older women like we are past our usefulness, like we've reached our expiration date, like our opinions matter less, like we're out of touch, like the world has moved on without us. The truth is almost the opposite. We are collectively one of the sharpest, most discerning groups of consumers and thinkers there is. We know who we are, what we like, what we want, and what we're going to do or not do. Society hasn't caught on yet. But here's where it gets complicated. Knowing something and being able to do it are not always the same thing. You can know, really know with total certainty, like how you know how to ride through a spook. You've done it 100 times. You understand exactly what your body needs to do. And then your horse spooks and your body hesitates, tenses, or grips instead of doing the thing. Your knowledge is intact. Your body is telling you where it is right now. It's about joints and balance and how the prospect of a fall means something different than it used to. Since there are about 100 small physical realities now that didn't used to be part of the equation. For a while, this can feel like something's been taken away from us. And there's grief in it. A frustration in knowing exactly what to do and feeling your body just can't. But I want to offer up a different way of looking at it because I think this is actually one of the more empowering shifts available to us in this decade. The disconnect you feel between knowing how to do something and physically doing it is information to work with. Accepting it instead of being endlessly frustrated about it means that you can start being the rider you actually are instead of the one you remember being. This sort of self-assessment is going to require honesty and authenticity. But acceptance here isn't resignation so much as it's where the power is. Because once you stop spending energy being upset that your body changed, all of that energy is available for something else, like actually riding your horse today as the person you are today. So, how do we bridge the gap between what we know and what we have access to in the moment? I think the answer is simpler than it sounds. It's this. We stop outsourcing our own judgment or putting aside our own wisdom and experience. For so much of our riding lives, a lot of us were trained to look outside ourselves for the answers to our riding trouble. What does this instructor think? What does the clinician say? What do the trends say? What would the judge want to see? We got very good at checking in with everyone except ourselves. Of course, this tendency is not limited to riding. It happens in other areas of our life too. Here's the thing about having decades behind us. We don't need that affirmation anymore from outside sources, or we don't need it in the same way. We've done this. We know what a good ride feels like. We know when a horse is telling us something. We know in our bodies what works for us and what doesn't, even if we've spent years deferring that knowledge to someone else's opinion. So we need not to think of this as learning something new so much as giving ourselves permission to trust the experience we already have. This shows up like this. When you feel something going on with your horse and your instinct says one thing, and instead of immediately looking around for confirmation, you just go with it. You trust it. And it turns out it's right. And then it happens again and again. Those moments are evidence, proof that we know, but we just got into the habit of needing someone else's sign off before trusting it. At this point in our lives, we get to be the authority on our own riding. We get help when we need it, of course, because there's a big difference between trusting yourself and refusing to listen to wise input from others. But the baseline for this moves. We're not waiting for anyone else's permission anymore. We just do the thing because we know how. Here's the hardest piece, and I'm still working through this myself. Letting go of who you were. There's a version of you, a version of me, who rode a certain way, did certain things, thought of herself a certain way. Maybe for you, it's that version of you that competed at a level you don't anymore. Maybe she rode every single day without a second thought about her body. Maybe she had a horse that's gone now and an era went with him. And letting go of her is genuinely hard. I've felt that grief. I think a lot of us are walking around with some version of it, even though we're also moving forward. Letting go of who you were isn't a loss so much as an opportunity, because the version of you that exists right now, with everything you've been through, everything you've learned, everything that's changed in your body and your mind and your life, she has never existed before. Not once in your whole life has there been a you exactly like the one you are right now. This time, she gets to decide who she is, with all of this experience behind her and no need for others' permission or approval. If you want to dig deeper into this, I've written some journal prompts for you. These are kind of like mirrors, and you can ask yourself one or more of these. What's one thing about how I used to ride or how I used to be that I'm ready to let go of without judgment? What does the rider I am right now know that the rider I was 10 or 20 years ago didn't? If I trust my own judgment without checking it against anyone else's, what would I do differently today? These prompts are in the show notes, along with the resource page where I link the exercises and the other things that have helped me the most. You can check that out if you want to continue exploring resources for this season of life, both in and out of the saddle. So that's dialed in as I see it. It's not about having all the answers or never doubting anything. It's about recognizing that somewhere along the way, after enough years and enough living, your judgment got sharp. Your filter got better. And whatever gap exists between what you know and what your body does on any given day, that's just where you are right now. And that's allowed. That clarity, the one that it lets you separate the overblown claims from facts, is 40 or 50 or however many years of paying attention, of living. And I think it's something really brilliant about being right here, right now, in this stage of life. Thank you for being here, for showing up with your horses and refusing to let age define what's possible. See you in the barn. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode resonated, I hope you'll join me again next week as we continue riding through this season together. Until then, take good care of yourself and your horse.